In this video, I'm going to continue where we left off in our curriculum dashboard database here, but kind of walk you through the creation of your own projects, lessons, and modules. So one of the first independent tasks that we'll ask you to complete as a part of this training, in your TeachSTEM dashboard, you will go into project topics, and you will fill out your first brainstorm for the projects that you will be completing throughout this year. So as a reminder, all teacher participants are asked to complete 4 projects over the course of the school year. The timing of these projects is up to you. We were thinking 1 per quarter when we created the requirement of 4 projects. However, if you know that you have a very busy spring, you could front load some projects into the first semester. So you could do 3 projects semester 1 and 1 project during your second semester there. Your projects do not all have to be completed within the same class or with the same group of students. We'll just ask, and I'll show you as we go through this. As you create your projects, you'll be telling us which class and which students you'll be doing these projects with. So as you're working through here, you'll be going through and kind of building your overall project goal. So what is it that you want your students to be building, to be investigating, or to be creating, right? So this could be an overarching art project. If you're an art teacher, this could be a research project for our English or social studies teachers. This could be a more traditional like investigation into Cape Fear region water quality for some of our science classes. But this is where you'll briefly describe the overall goal of this project. You'll fill out your class information. If you do not have this information, I know we're just getting back into the swing of the school year, but you'll go through and fill out this information. So this would be like, for example, if you're teaching it in a biology classroom or you're teaching this in a social studies classroom, you'd fill it out there. Grade level, and then the number of students that will be completing the project. The standards that this project will be tied to. And then this is where we really kind of get into some of these planning here, these planning steps here. So this step right here is very important because this is what we're going to use to build the actual guided activities that will prepare your students for this project. So thinking about the standards, what are the background concepts that the students are going to need to have to understand before they get started? So I'm going to use the example of water quality. I'm going to want my students to understand the importance of pH. I am going to want them to understand sources of pollution, point and non-point runoff. I'm going to start listing these here. I am going to want them to understand effects of pollution on biotic and abiotic life, etc., etc. So thinking about what are these background concepts that my students are going to need to have a good handle on before they can complete a research project. And then going through and thinking about, and these do not have to be your final research questions, but brainstorming potential research questions for this project. So I could say, what is the health of the Cape Fear River? I don't love this question, but I'm just in my brainstorm phase here. What effect does pollution in the Cape Fear River have on wildlife, right? I'm brainstorming questions that my students could be investigating. A minimum of 3 is required to submit this. If you have a lot of questions that you want to be brainstorming, you can keep adding these. Now, you are not tied in at this step to make sure that this is one of the questions of the research project. This is just to start getting the juices flowing. I've also had situations where teachers have said, I have my general topic, but my students are allowed to select their own actual individual research question, and that is fine as well. You could provide several samples for them from these brainstorming steps, or you could have students, depending on their age, completely independently come up with their own research questions based on the overall project overview up here. And then finally, starting to think about what materials and supplies will be needed for this project. This is not the end all be all. you will be meeting with either myself or Miss Ashton Carruthers, the two TeachSTEM project coordinators, to actually go through in depth these topics to help you with the planning and how you're going to implement these things, so you can talk more in depth about the materials and supplies that are needed. But this is where you'll start to fill this out. When you're complete, you will submit this for review, and then you'll be able to receive feedback from the YSA staff. So you might be saying, okay, why did you start with this? This step is one of the things that we will ask you to do in order to move on to the next part of our training. As part of that first release of the stipend, we'll ask you to submit at least your first project overview here for the first project that you want to complete. I went over this first because I wanted to really emphasize these background concepts and this idea of backwards planning of, we know our end goal, we know what we want our students to get to, and now we're thinking, okay, how are we going to get there? So that's where in your classroom, you will start to actually go ahead and build in the lessons or the activities that your students will be doing in order to get to this point. So all of the lessons that we have in our lesson library, you have access to. You can use some of the pre-made ones. You can customize some of the pre-made ones depending on what the topic is, or you can build and assign your own right in here. The idea of a YSA guided lesson is that it is hands-on, it is focusing on building observation and building questioning skills with the students, and it's taking them through that cycle of the YSA way. So when you are ready, you can go through, and this is where you'll start to actually say, okay, these are the activities that my students are going to complete in order to get to this project. If you already have a series of lessons that you implement in your classroom, we'll talk in our curriculum meetings about that in order to kind of get them to this point of this project. But we would love to work with you on adapting those into YSA style hands-on lessons that can be shared in this curriculum dashboard. All TeachSTEM teachers will have access to every lesson that's made. So you'll be able to share these with others and also use the lessons that other people have created in order to build really interesting modules. So let's say that I am an English teacher and I want to be studying I'm using one of our Global Ambassador projects where she is working with students to understand their access to mental health resources, and you want to kind of turn this into a larger like reading, writing project. But in this one, we want to just kind of create a survey for students, right? So this could be all about like designing surveys, right? So this would be a guided activity because I'd be working with my students. My lesson, I am going to, students will learn how to design a survey to gather information. I'm not going to go through this whole thing step by step, but students will need, right, if I'm doing this on Google Forms, they're going to need, well, I won't say access, I'll just say computer. If you're doing this paper pencil, they might just need paper and a pencil. If there's a video that you want to use as an introduction, you can link this in here. You will not see this. This is only visible to admin, but if I'm designing a lesson specifically for the TeachSTEM teachers, this is where it will appear only to you all. If there are physical handouts, data sheets, anything that you want students to download, or if a teacher, if this is being shared out into the dashboard, which it will be, files for teachers to download and print out to provide to students would go here. So this is where I'm going to now start to build like a pre lab reading. And here's all the different styles of prompts. So if I want to give a written prompt to my student, I would go ahead and I would type the instructions right here. If I wanted to give just instructions to the student, so this is just things that they will see, they will not have the opportunity to respond to instructions. So I could say, read the attached article. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. And then this is a teacher note. So this will appear on the teacher end of lesson design. It will not appear to the students. So within this section, I can add prompts, I can add instructions, I can add videos, and I can add links. So here I could link in the article that I want students to read, and here's the title. If I want them to watch a video, I could insert a video here. If I want them to watch a video and then answer the questions, I'll then add a prompt. You'll see here, this is where I can kind of rearrange the order that they're presented in. So I can get really customized here with my actual lesson building. When I'm done with my pre-lab reading, I can add a new section. So this could be my observation activity. And I might design an activity where students are, they need to design 3 questions to learn the most about a classmate or something. Or maybe I'm going to do an activity where they're given like a 20 questions, something like that, where students are really focusing on the importance of designing thoughtful, meaningful questions, something like that. But something that gets them thinking, that gets them building these observations. Once again, I would make that a teacher note, go through some instructions. You can get really customized. You can build as many sections as you want, and you can call them different things. Whatever makes the most sense for your classroom. When you are finished creating a lesson, you would submit for review. Before a lesson is published to the larger lesson library, it will be reviewed by YSA staff to make sure it aligns, that we won't be editing your content. We just want to put eyeballs on it before it's released to the larger lesson library. So finally, I want to talk about modules. So the idea of a module is in that slide that we talked about, right? Of scaffolding the work up to a project. So within a module, so let's say I want to be investigating water quality, right? I can search my activity library. So if I know there are specific activities that I want, I would search for them here. You can also just kind of browse all of the lessons. So I want to work on water quality. So I'm going to add first the Kitchen Curiosity guided lesson. And this teaches the basics of pH to a student. Then I want them to understand that we can learn about water by studying the life that lives in there. So the macroinvertebrates. So I might add macroinvertebrate sampling. And then finally, our ocean acidification activity, I would add that here. And you can see the module sequence starting to build. Now, let's say at the beginning of these, though, I want to do a STEM challenge to get my students thinking. So what is in ink? That's where students use chromatography to separate out the different colors inside a black marker. Walking water talks about adhesion and cohesion, and this is using pressure to move water, or air pressure, and creating vacuums to move water. So I'm going to use, I guess for this one, I'm just going to use what is ink. I might not actually use any of these, but for this purpose, well, if I want them to do my challenge first, I can use these arrows to move, and to move my challenge up to the top. And then I can go ahead and create this module. So right now I didn't hit create because I actually already have, a module created called water quality. So you can see that this is now here. I can assign this to a classroom, and now students will have to work through this in a specific order. So the idea is that they would complete each of these activities in sequence in the classroom before they then move on to the larger project.